in Westport, and we want to thank you all for joining us for today's timely webinar, How to Implement Difficult Change to Survive and Succeed, hosted by Susan Vogel. Susan is the founder of SB Vogel Consulting. As a business consultant, strategist, and change facilitation coach, easy for you to say.
Yeah, right.
Her expertise lies in making difficult change simple for her clients. Susan is skilled in helping individuals, teams, and organizations implement the behavioral change that enables them to achieve their strategic objectives. She applies knowledge of the brain science behind changing behaviors in a pragmatic way for her clients. Importantly, Susan is certified in Key Change Institute's Applied Neuroscience Change Acquisition process. So I'm very interested. I know I have a couple of things I'd like to survive and succeed in. So I'm very excited to hear what you have to say, Susan.
Thanks, Maureen.
Yeah, for any of you who are not familiar with Serendipity Labs, we are an upscale hospitality-focused workplace solution. We have over 40 locations nationwide. Whether you need an occasional workplace for yourself or more long-term offices for your team, we have everything for you. You can host off-site meetings and events in our conference rooms, and we'll find something that meets your needs and budget. One thing that is unique about our labs is the professional networking and valuable business connections that happen organically among our members. Inspired by these connections, we created Link, Learn, Inspire, Network, and Collaborate. And that is how I met Susan, if I'm not mistaken. We did meet at a networking event. So I'm very excited to welcome Susan and look forward to this. But before we get started, I wanted to make sure the attendees are aware to please save your questions or comments for the end of the presentation and utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type in your questions. At one point, Susan will let you know, I know there's a piece there where she wants to hear from you directly to engage you in this presentation, so look for that and be ready. Our presenters will be reading the questions aloud and answering for you. We will also be sending out a follow-up email, including information on how to connect with the panelists and also offer a complimentary day pass here at Serendipity Labs if you should have the need. I will now hand it over to you, Susan, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Maureen, and thanks, ladies, for your help. Yes, we've known each other for years now. I've been to many Serendipity Labs events, have spoken there several times, and certainly do appreciate you guys hosting me today. So today we're going to talk about difficult change, and I would like you to think back when you were a kid or when your kids were kids, maybe in kindergarten or preschool, when the teacher is letting kids know all about colors and they are trying to create a common understanding. So they write the word red on the board, they hand the child a red crayon and you color roses and tulips red. You do the same for green. Here's green, here's how we spell it. Let's color the grass green. And the attempt there is to have a common understanding of what those words mean. And this is all well and good, except if a child is colorblind. And to them, they will be lost because everything will be brown. And so they will not be able to interact with the class the same way. If you think about a color being similar to an emotional intelligence skill, a way of thinking, a way of reacting, a way of responding, and you're missing that skill or it is somehow blocked, it's a lot like being colorblind. You're going to be frustrated. And so when people talk to you about a way that you should be thinking or doing or behaving, you'll be confused. So for example, in today's environment, you have a lot of people screaming at you, you got to be adaptable, you need to be flexible, you got to have creative solutions for your business. This can be stuff that you need right now, but in general, things that feedback that you're getting that's not making sense, right? Or that you know about yourself. For example, maybe people are telling you you're too black and white and you're like, I don't know what that means. Or you need to be more empathetic. Well, I thought I was. You're a control freak, right? Well, I'm just trying to get things done well. All this kind of feedback, if it's confusing to us or if it doesn't make sense or we have a big gap in our understanding, is a lot like being colorblind. And so we're going to talk today about how to identify these sorts of goals you might need for yourself, different ways of thinking that will help you in either your business or your career. So what's been happening in the past year is that there are a lot of balls in the air. And I see two camps, really fairly extreme. You have one group of folks that has been waiting for this to pass, right? Initially, we thought it was going to be a few weeks and then a few months. And so they're kind of hiding out. Maybe they're avoiding making changes, or they're sort of stuck in that mode of, I'm just going to have to go down. Like, I don't know how to save my business. And then there's another group that's out there catching all the balls. So I'm going to assume that you're all here today because you want to be a ball catcher. And so one of the first things you need to understand is that when we have a fear reaction, an anxiety reaction, when there's a lot of stuff going on that maybe feels overwhelming, what we're experiencing is something called an amygdala hijack. Lots of people talk about this. Sometimes it's called lizard brain. But in a sense, what happens is that there's a part of our brain, the amygdala, which is where the fight or flight response is housed. And this can serve a lot of purposes for us. It's an important thing to be able to interpret. But when we're in that mode, we literally can't think straight. We are so intent on being able to escape whatever it is. If you go back to caveman time, if it's a lion or something, that we can't use other parts of our brain. And the problem is when this is happening to us on a daily basis, as we're doing our jobs or we're running our business, we're not able to access the parts of our brain that can think linearly or that can solve a problem or make a decision. So it's important to first identify whether you think you're in this spot, in this headspace, and find a way to bring yourself down to the point where you can actually use your thinking skills. So that's one kind of big flaming thing to be looking for. Another is emotional overwhelm, where we become very reactive. So another common issue is that people think, oh, emotions don't belong at work. And right now, in the past year, we've had a lot of emotions day in and day out, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're not the enemy. It's what we do with them. And so another thing you want to watch for yourself is, are you so overwhelmed you're checking out? Or, do you have colleagues or employees that are checking out? Maybe somebody's not paying attention in a meeting, or you're just not being very responsive. That's one end of that spectrum where we haven't really taken hold of what's happening and decided what to do with it. On the other end is very reactive. These are the people that are, having temper tantrums and yelling and screaming at people. These are not helpful reactions and are some of the extreme things that we might be dealing with because of a lot of stress with what's happening around us. So we want to hone in on these things and make some changes. We want to think differently. Everything I'm going to talk about today is based on the brain science of change. Neuroscience research in the last 12 or 15 years has taught us that we are actually capable of great change, that we can actually rewire our brains to think differently, respond differently, react differently. We just need to follow certain steps. So everything I'm going to talk about today is in fact based on science and just translating it into some simple steps that you can do for yourself and that I use in my practice all the time with clients. So the first thing we have to do is be cognizant of what it is that's going on. And often what happens is similar to what might be at your house. If you have a teenager or a spouse that tends to walk over their socks, their dirty socks in the middle of the floor, or walk around them, and you can say, can you please pick up your socks? And they'll be like, what socks? This happens a lot. I see it all the time with clients where there's something right in front of them that they are not seeing, that maybe somebody has given them feedback on, but they're just not seeing the socks. In order to make a change and to address an issue, you first have to be aware of you've got something that you've got to work on. So you got to listen to what feedback you're getting from colleagues, your boss, your employees, or your clients. Secondly, you then have to pay attention. So if you have a warning light on in your car, you have two choices. You can, of course, go get it fixed, or you can ignore it and hope for the best, but eventually something bad's going to happen. A lot of times people will come to me and say, you know, I saw the red flags, but I just ignored them. I didn't know what to do about it, or I avoided it. And then things get too far down the pike. So you really want to be paying attention to any warning flags that you're getting from others around you or in your own head. So there's a big differentiator that we know of as it relates to who succeeds and who fails in general, but in particularly during difficult times. And this was actually proven with a case study of two very similar entrepreneurs. They found two folks that were in business for 10 years. They were in very similar businesses. They came from the same area. They had access to the same education. They had access to funds. They had a good labor pool. And they looked at every aspect of these folks and measured it. So they gave them IQ tests, emotional intelligence tests. They basically knew everything about them. There was only one difference between these two people. One of the business owners had an extremely high score in self-awareness. And by this, I mean that we can honestly and objectively assess ourselves, our strengths and our weaknesses. And we do this without beating ourselves up. We do it with action in mind. And so one of these business owners had a very high score in self-awareness. And she happened to then know how to act. So she didn't know something, she got a coach, or she brought an expert in from outside. She would hire people that were smarter than her in the areas that were not her strength. And she did this continuously throughout the 10 years of her business career. And she grew her enterprise to $1 billion. The other entrepreneur, who again was on paper very, very similar, practically identical, had a very low score in self-awareness. They were not comfortable bringing in outside help. They thought it was a weakness to admit needing help. They weren't comfortable or confident enough to bring in super smart people that might be smarter than them. And at the end of the 10-year period, this person was ready to sign to go bankrupt. So this is a really important skill set. And it's also important to be able to really do an inventory for yourself as you're thinking about some of this information I'm providing today, to really look inward and be honest with yourself about what you're good at and what you might need some help with. Some things that we can run into as we're doing this work, and if we're trying to figure out how to make changes, is to look at our recent behaviors. So a lot of times people will come to this webinar, come to me because they are stuck, or they're procrastinating a lot and it's driving them crazy. And these things are not something they consciously want to do, you know, so they know there's something going on, but not exactly why. So any of these words in the puzzle might apply. The other things that's really important to look at is, in general, not executing. So maybe you have a good strategy and you know exactly what you need to do for your business, but you're just not doing it. Or your boss has given you goals that you've agreed to. You think they're great goals, but for some reason, you're just not getting them done. This would be a sign that maybe there's something deeper that you need to address, some bigger changes in thinking that you want to identify for yourself. It's also important to understand that if we are capable of making this kind of change, of learning a new skill, and I mean higher level thinking skills. So I'm not talking about learning how to balance your P&L statement. I'm talking about thinking shifts. We are able to do it in 6 months. If we go read that book, we go to a webinar like this, maybe we take a class, if our brain is capable of making that shift, we'll do it ourselves. But if it's something you've been trying to do for a long time, often people come saying, this has been on my list for 2 or 3 years now, then you might need a little bit more support and to dig a little deeper in how you set goals and help yourself make these changes. So one of the things that happens now is we start to think about this, right? So we're being more honest with ourselves. We understand that we're stuck, or we understand that we'd like to make a really big leap and therefore probably need to change the way we're doing things, is the idea of change and how we react to it. So a few people might be lucky, like this guy on the left, or he's on my left, where they're very fluid and flexible already. You want me to make a change tomorrow? No problem, I can do that. But more people tend to fall in this other category of being very overwhelmed by change or not liking it. We're all very comfortable in the way we're doing things now. So it's important to do a gut check and see, how am I reacting to this idea of doing things differently? And there's a reason for this. So as human beings, we are wired to resist from the get-go. And the analogy I'm going to use to explain this concept is one of our many storms that we've had this year, right? I live on the end of a long driveway, and I need to walk up that driveway to get to my mailbox. So if you think about trudging through 3 feet of snow, now I've got my mail, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to decide to go back in the same footsteps because it's easier. Why would I want to step through 2 and 3 feet of snow again? A similar process happens when we learn to do something a certain way, or when we experience it a certain way. We lay down a neural pathway. So if we are taught how to make a decision from a young age, or maybe at our first job in a very specific way, every time we do it that way, we're reinforcing those neural pathways. Just like every time we walk through the snow steps that we've left, we are reinforcing and making it easier to follow them. This is all well and good, except if the habit that we have created, the neural pathways that we've laid down for ourselves, are no longer working for us, or maybe they're maladaptive in the first place. So imagine if you, the next day, and this I actually took in my own driveway, right? You are going up the driveway again, you have to go get your mail, you haven't been plowed yet, but you can see better now, and you see that you took a detour, right? That it wasn't a good path. In this case, I did this without even thinking. I went to go take a picture. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, gee, I should go straight, right? If I'm meandering all over the place, that's not a good path. The problem is that our brain likes that old way of doing things. And so even though I know it's a stupid path, I may still follow the footsteps. And the same thing happens with our thinking habits. We can identify that it's not working for us, that we need a different reaction, a different response, a different kind of decision. And those neural pathways keep us in the old way of thinking. So that's what we have to work on. To give you an example of how this can happen, this is kind of a fun, extreme one. But if you remember The Big Bang Theory, lots of people saw that show. It was on for a long time. Sheldon is a character who is very distinct. He does not understand emotion. He does not like emotion. He does not understand how he lands on people. And some of this is the way he's written, but some of it is the way that he was raised. And in it, at some point during the show, they have him dating Amy. And in the scene that makes me think about this whole issue, in the episode, they were watching a movie together, and it was one of Sheldon's favorite. And Amy pointed out that there was something in the movie that was not factual and was impossible. This enraged Sheldon, and he felt like he had to get back at her. So he spent a week looking at shows that she liked and movies she liked and books that were favorites of hers, looking for something that he could throw back in her face. And finally he finds it. So he arranges to watch a show with Amy, and he's like, we're going to watch Little House on the Prairie. I know how much you love this show. And she's so excited. And so they're watching the show, and Sheldon's waiting for his moment. And there it is. Laura Ingalls Wilder is eating a peanut butter sandwich. And he says, aha, that's not true. She couldn't possibly have eaten a peanut butter sandwich. They didn't invent peanut butter back then. And Amy pauses and she looks at Sheldon and she says, Sheldon, were you angry when I pointed out that something was untrue in your movie? You know, we're a couple, we're dating. You can tell me if you're upset with me. And Sheldon says, oh no, when my mama was mad at my daddy for staying out all night, she took the rat poop and put it in his snuff. That was how he learned to deal with emotions. So that's a little extreme, but it really is very true. If you saw conflict being handled a certain way since you were young, or if you're working in a long time in a company where the culture doesn't have good communication or people avoid conflict, that's going to be your neural pathway and your habit. And it's one that you're going to need to break. So again, the good news is that we can make these changes. We can, in fact, teach an old dog new tricks. And it does not matter how old you are. It does not matter how long you've been thinking a certain way. It may take a little longer, be a little harder, but it can be done. And there are very specific steps that we can take. And this is, again, based on science that allow us to do this. I've done this with 70-year-olds, so it really can be done at any time. So the good news is that the brain can change, which changes everything. We can apply this concept to many things to think ahead and be proactive, as well as to solve issues. So if you think about the stages of a business, there are lots of shifts you need to make in the way you're thinking. We can apply this concept to that. Maybe you start as a solopreneur after having worked for somebody else, and you have to start thinking differently. You have to think for yourself and make decisions. Now you've grown your business and you have some employees, but now you have to learn to lead those employees, and you have to give up some control to them and make sure that they can do things differently. And you can't do everything, and they're not going to do it the same way you do. That's a shift in thinking. And onward, right? So at some point you want to get to the point where you're the orchestra leader and everyone else is doing the day-to-day work. So you can go off and to play golf in Florida or think about selling your business at some point. All of those stages require huge shifts in thinking and very different skills. So the things that were working for you at one stage of the business may no longer work as you're growing your business. Same thing with a career. Each job may require very different thinking, and you may move from being a doer to a leader. So all these things can be applied and looked at very proactively, as well as to fix an issue that's happening now. So I'd like to help you understand the different ways you might be responding to things, because there actually is a continuum. So this too is based on science. We know that if you look at 100 people, there are going to be 5 different possible responses. The first is the most flexible group, and it's also one of the smaller groups. So 7–10% of the population are very fluid. They have very little resistance. They can change their behaviors and the way they think very easily. They don't need a lot of support. You could tell them to do something differently tomorrow and they'd be able to do it. This next group can change without support, but they need to agree to be able to make the changes. So if you're thinking about yourself, right, this may be that you need to have a business case or an understanding of why this change might help you or impact your business. If you have employees that you're thinking about, you're going to be needing to help them understand how this is going to make them do better at their job, or it may positively impact clients. So these folks are also pretty fluid. This next group, which is about 40% of the population, is the most common response. These are folks probably like yourselves and why you're here that want to improve or make changes, but they can't figure out how to do it. They keep trying, right? I've read 3 books on this subject. I've, followed all the steps. I just can't seem to make the shift. This is how a lot of us tend to think, and therefore need a little help in navigating our own internal resistance. The next group is when it starts to get more difficult, either if this is for yourself or perhaps someone that works for you. This is folks that tell themselves that they don't want to improve, right? They don't see the need. The way we've been doing things has always worked. So they're going to be very resistant, but at least they're letting you know. So these are folks that are clear about how they feel about the change, or for yourself even. You may be like, yeah, everybody keeps telling me I should be doing this differently to help my business, but I just don't want to. I like doing things the way I am right now. And this final group is at the far end of the spectrum. It's also a smaller cohort, about 7% of the population. These folks are tricky because they're going to tell you they're on board. I'm happy to do that. They'll be nodding their heads in the meeting. Or even for yourself, right? You can be telling other folks, yeah, I'm going to follow this new plan, no problem. But they really don't want to do it, and they're not going to make any attempt. Now, this segment of folks actually can make change. It takes a lot more work. I have a special model that I use for folks that fall into this category. Sometimes these are people that have been told they must do these changes to keep their job, for example. But unfortunately, there's folks in this group that because of this high resistance, don't want to make a change, don't feel they need to make a change, they will go down with the ship. So if you hear of somebody that's lost their business of 25 years because they didn't adapt, or somebody gets fired or loses a marriage, they might be in this category because they were not interested in making any changes. So I like this quote from Charles Darwin, right? It's really about being able to adapt. That's what differentiates us. It's not being strong. It's not this idea that I don't need help. It's being flexible and adaptable. So when it comes to implementing change, difficult change, it is an uncomfortable place to be, but it's where all the good stuff happens. So until you push yourself out of that place that you like to be, you're not going to see that huge growth. And especially in the past year, and even looking forward with all the volatility and the uncertainty, everybody's been in some uncomfortable places. So you've had to push to make these changes. So this is a spot where, and I can't see the chat box, but if you want to put in there some of the challenges that you have been facing or that you are looking at going forward, or those changes that you want to make, go ahead and put that in there and we'll try to address them as we go along. So one of you ladies, let me know if there's anything in there. Do we have typing going on? I can't see. Okay, if any of you are talking, I can't hear you. So I'm going to keep going. Okay, so now you've got an idea that you need to make some shifts in your business or your career and how you're doing things. But the first thing you need to do is figure out what specifically you're trying to get done. Imagine that you get in your car and you just start to drive and you haven't decided where you're going. There's no destination in mind. So you drive and drive and drive until you eventually run out of gas and you end up someplace you don't want to be. This is exactly what can happen if you don't plan for what you're trying to do with your business or your career. And in this case, as it relates to implementing changes and making changes, we need to have a plan. We need to have some goals and some understanding of where we're trying to end up. So the way that I like to suggest people do this is as a parallel path. So many of you may be familiar with the left-hand side of this graphic. If you own your own business, you probably have some sort of strategy. You've got some goals for yourself. If you work for somebody, you're often given objectives. And so you're pretty good at breaking this down into what do I have to do day in and day out? What are the tasks I need to accomplish? And I call this the strategic path. Sometimes people use SMART goals, for example. And so this way of planning is well known, and hopefully lots of you are already doing this kind of planning for yourself, this kind of goal setting. The piece that I add is the behavioral side. It's a parallel path. And what we're doing is we're identifying what are the behavioral goals that I need to achieve in order to meet my strategy. Do I need to start making decisions differently or spend my time differently? Do I need to make a shift in how I'm thinking about clients? Do I need to interact with employees differently? Maybe I need to push myself into new markets or start to network so that I can set up referral partners that send me referrals and I don't have to spend so much money on marketing. You know, maybe I'm thinking about selling my business in a few years and I need to really have a plan mapped out. But that means I have to start shifting the way I behave and giving control to other people. These are all behavioral goals, and it's really important to plan for them and to set them just like you do any other goals. And as part of this, sometimes we need to identify what we need to stop doing, which is called an unlearning goal. So instead of doing X, I now need to do Y, and that's going to support my overall objectives. So once we've set up these starting to cut at these behavioral goals, right? I've identified some shifts that are required to support my business or career strategy. I need to start looking at what might get in my way. You know, this is like looking for the potholes before you hit the gas. And as part of this exercise, you're going to want to think about what are those behaviors and thinking habits that are not working very well for me, right? Or that are keeping me from making the changes that I want to make, or are keeping me from growing the business or getting the next job. As part of that unlearning piece, it's good to look at what used to work, but maybe isn't working anymore. And this is often through no fault of our own. Things are changing around us, so we have to change too. So a strategy or a way of thinking, of making decisions, of leading people that might have been highly successful for a long time can stop working for us. So here's my philosophy on all of this as you're thinking about these things. You do not want to bring a fly swatter to a situation where what you really need is a pooper scooper. It's important to separate symptoms from root cause. And often people are really swatting at flies. They've got this long list of things they need to work on or long list of issues, when in fact those things are all symptoms. You want to know what is the cause of it. What's that rotting piece of fruit that if I get rid of that, all the flies will disappear. So this is a key aspect of this approach. I swear I did this slide a long time ago. This was before COVID, folks. But in order to illustrate this, let's say somebody's got a sore throat and they're coughing a lot. That could mean many things, right? And depending on what it is, you know, the solution to it is going to be different. So if it's a cold, right, good old chicken noodle soup might suffice. If my cough and my sore throat are because of the flu, I might need Tamiflu. And if, God forbid, it's something more serious, at the time I did this, I was thinking pneumonia, you know, and I might need to go in the hospital or have something a lot more stronger to help me get through whatever it is. This is really important because for each individual who complains of a certain symptom, like I have a hard time making decisions, or I need to prioritize my time differently. I'm so in the weeds, you know, and I really need to strategize and think big picture. Or, you know, I keep wanting to give more control to my employees, but I grab it back and I don't know why. These are symptoms, and the root cause of why people are doing it is going to be different for every person. So tough decisions can be from 5 different things. Not being able to give up control, lots and lots of root causes for that. So it's really critical that when we start to look at this and you start to think about your goals around it, that you peel that back and really start to understand what's causing you to exhibit these symptoms. So the way we do that is by starting to set some really important goals for this. So there's 2 kinds of goals. There's important ones, and then there's the outrageously important ones. So an important goal is one of consequence, but that is the things you set, like how much revenue you want to make, or how many new clients do you need to bring in? You know, how do I need to bring on a certain employee? Those are all really important goals. The outrageously important goal is the one that's going to make the difference. So if I need to make a big shift in thinking, you know, if I've figured out where I'm getting in my own way to build my business or enter a new market, the goal around that is the biggie. That's the one that if I don't do that first, I'm not going to get anything else done. And so these are really important to set for yourself. Some questions you can ask yourself in order to do that are, what do I need to learn to do? You know, or what do I keep doing that's not helping anymore? Is there a nail I keep hitting with the same hammer? Are there things that I know I would like to change about myself, or areas I need to grow in that I want to add some skills? What's keeping me up at night? What do I think about all the time, especially recently? And if you've already identified what's stopping you, if you kind of know why you put your foot on the brake all the time, that's what you want to set a goal around. And we want to focus on behaviors. So this is just a small sampling of the kind of outrageously important behaviors we want to look at. And we can make shifts in any of these. You know, a lot of times, maybe it's not we're a very good listener. We're not an active listener. And people are always telling us, you know, you're not listening to me. I already told you this. Perhaps we want to be more confident. Or less reactive. If you remember the slide I showed you where one person was sort of checked out and another was being very overreactive, that often gets in the way of good decision making and running a business effectively, or being super effective collaborating with our peers. I've highlighted several here that have seemed to be in demand during the last year as people are looking to pivot their careers or their businesses, needing to do things really differently. And those are adaptability, flexibility, and creativity. So let's look first at a couple of sample goals, and then I'll show you how to break this down. So when we're talking about these outrageously important behavioral goals, we want to think futuristically, and we want to be affirmative. So this is about things I will do. I will adopt more flexible standards, and I will be more nimble. You know, I'm going to value myself. I'm going to charge what I'm worth. You want to make these positive statements that are about shifting behaviors and way of thinking for yourself. And this is the beginning of the process. So you can do this for yourself. This is what I do with clients, but you really want to peel back that onion to understand at its core, what are those important shifts that I need to make? And when you go back to read these, they should make you uncomfortable. If you've done a good job at this, it will be pushing you outside your comfort zone. So here's some examples. And let's now look at some of these ways of thinking that we might want to hone in on. Again, adaptable is one that a lot of folks have been relying on and may find difficult. Now, one of the reasons why you could look at it to go like adaptable and say, oh, how am I going to do that, is because there's actually a number of pillar skills underneath it, and you may just be missing one of them. So that's another important thing to understand so that you're not beating yourself up about things. So one of the aspects of being adaptable that we have measured, again, via science, is that people that are highly adaptable also have a high level of self-control. They can maintain and tune into their emotions. They let them drive things. They don't lose their cool. Another aspect of being adaptable is fearlessness. You have to be willing to try to make mistakes, or try things and be willing to make mistakes. You can't worry so much about what everybody else is thinking as you try these things or what other people are doing. So there needs to be some confidence there. A third part of this is integrity. In order to be adaptable in this market, you have to be operating with integrity. You have to care about your employees. We need to keep people safe. We need to pursue things that are ethical. And finally, the fourth pillar of behavior that falls under adaptability is followship. This does not necessarily mean a title. This is that ability to mentor people, to motivate them, to influence them to follow you, to follow a plan, to be accountable to what you're trying to do. So if you're missing any one of these, it would be difficult to be adaptable. So as you're setting goals for yourself, look at all the different things that might be influencing your ability to move forward. Real quickly, flexibility is very similar. You see some overlaps. There's that self-control again. People that are highly flexible happen to have high emotional intelligence skills. They're very open to input, and they also trust themselves. So again, this is listening, trying new things, trusting that I'm going to be okay. And creativity is similar. Again, there's some overlaps. There's that fearlessness again, right? I need to be able to jump in and try something in order to be creative. And I'm also going to be listening to other folks and getting feedback. Just checking my time here. Okay, so as we're setting these goals for yourself, here's the first thing I want you to do. I want you to visualize what you want it to look like in the future. If you need to, close your eyes. I often have clients do this. You want to have a picture of yourself in the future, asking for what you're worth, shifting that control to somebody else, making a different decision. And the better you can do that, the better you can do those I will goals. You then want to describe the goal vividly. And by that, I mean literally step by step. So if your goal is to be a more positive presenter, right, and to have more confidence, you're going to describe how you're going to walk in the room, where you're going to stand, how are you going, what kind of voice are you going to use? The more you can describe that for yourself, that future state, the more likely you are to write a good goal and to achieve it. And then finally, I want you to write it down. And in this age of computers, this may seem to be a weird request, but there's a reason for it from a science perspective. Writing it down puts it into a different part of our brain, and it helps it become part of a longer term memory. So jotting these things down for yourself. In my process, there's a lot of writing, not a lot of writing, but some writing assignments that all help with this and to put this in our long-term memory. So this is the the 3 steps that you want to do when you're writing these outrageously important goals for yourself. And real quickly, I wanted to do a client impact story to show how this all comes together. So I had a client who's a vet hospital, and we'd already done a lot of work on making some shifts. So when the pandemic hit, she was aware of the process and wanted to be able to adapt accordingly. So it is an essential service. And she decided that during the pandemic, she really wanted to be able to continue to provide the same level of care that she always had. She wanted to keep people safe, employees safe, clients safe, and really come up with a process that worked for everybody and communicate it in a positive way. So that was the new strategy. She knew what she didn't want to do. So there was a lot of folks that were kind of being very gloom and doom, and it was a scary time. This happens to be a piece of paper another vet had posted on their front door, right? It's very process driven. It's not very engaging, and it's kind of scary. As it relates to the ability to adapt, for her, she had 3 of the 4 pillars, but when we first started to work together, the fearlessness part was missing in a very specific way. And in her case, it was all about how other people might judge or perceive anything I do. So if I go do something differently, am I going to get slammed for that, right? Are people going to be on social media? And so we had fortunately worked on that, and we're in a place to understand how that might impact her decisions going forward on how she wanted to run her business during this time. So what we did very quickly is developed a concept of kitty valet. She's a cat vet, came up with a different process, figured out how we were going to keep people safe. But the communication was very different than anything else that you were seeing out there. It was very uplifting. It was upbeat. It was positive. It was confident. Took pictures of the process so that people could very clearly envision themselves coming still with their cats and knowing that they'd be feeling safe. And literally, it was a very simple message that was done in many places. Again, showing people, here's how it's going to be. This happens to be a window, right? So I can still watch what's happening. I can talk to you through the window, and we're all very safe. But all this, again, was done in the concept of, okay, how are we going to need to do things differently? So every member of the team needed to change the way they were doing their jobs. And a big part of this, again, because of what the shift, where the speed bump might be for her, was to establish the messaging and what are we going to be comfortable with. Doing it this way and really having that upbeat conversation with your clients on an ongoing basis and all the various places where you reach them had a great outcome for her. She actually grew her business and was up during those very key months at the beginning of the pandemic and was up overall for the year. And that continues to be the case. The thing I will tell you is that people that follow this process and hone in on behavioral goals as well as their strategies always make more money, even if that wasn't the plan. And if they're employee, they usually get a promotion, because really honing in on how we need to do things day in and day out helps us achieve those bigger goals. So quickly, a summary and review so we have time for some questions. First and foremost, remember that you are going to resist. You are going to be uncomfortable, and just embrace it. It's part of how we're wired. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It doesn't mean you're not motivated. It's something to expect that you can overcome. Next, you want to set goals for yourself. Super important. Make sure you're honing in not just on revenue and number of clients and markets, but also the behaviors that are required for you to execute on those goals, and visualize the changes you want to make. Describe them in detail in the future. Here's how I'm going to look as I'm doing these things, and then write them down. And finally, when we do this goal setting, don't set a zillion of them for yourself. When it comes to behavioral goals, sometimes one is all you need, no more than 3, because our brain gets overloaded. We cannot focus on that many shifts at one time. So really hone in on the most important thing for yourself. And that's it. Maureen, you're still muted. So if there are any questions, people can either unmute themselves or put them in the chat.
There are no questions yet, but we do have a comment from
Okay.
Anise. She said,
Okay.
I always think that I cannot afford to hire help.
That's a very common thing. And I will tell you, people often think they have to have enough money in the bank before they do it, which is, it's a scary thing. But if you are really doing it deliberately and plan accordingly, you can't make more money until you do it, right? Once you do, you execute the plan, right, to get the revenue to pay for it. And I have yet to have a client who did not make more money after hiring somebody. They paid for themselves every time. But you do have to make a leap, and it's a scary one. Any other questions?
You know, I have a question for you, Susan. First of all, I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Phenomenal. And I'm a big believer in you have to get out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
I'm a skier, and I've taught my boys to ski, and every single time we go out there, I tell them, let's go hit a double black diamond, or, you know, a big bump run, because you got to get outside of your comfort zone. Do something that scares you today. And it makes you a better skier, and it makes you a better person. So I thought that was really good. My one question though is, you know, you say to be adaptable or to create the change. You know, there's different factors that go into it. And one thing that kind of resonated with me is, you know, the fearlessness, you know, some of these characters, and self-awareness, integrity. Now, let's say I come to you and I'm like, okay, I really want to implement these changes to be more successful in my personal life or my career. And you realize, oh, wow, you don't have any integrity, or geez, you've got a lot of fear. How are you going to help somebody to have fearlessness or to have integrity?
So we need to look at the root cause of it. And it starts by setting those goals, right? So if you realize that you have fear-based decisions, for example, right? I hit the brake way too soon all the time. I'm going to look at using an assessment process, the root cause of that. And it can be lots of different things. For some people, the fear is based on the fact that they only make analytical decisions and they don't know how to make a gut check, right? Or they are not at all being introspective and understanding that there are tangible and intangible to every decision. There's all kinds of reasons why people might be reacting in fear. And once you can get to that root of it, you know, it's the rotting apple piece, then I give you skills to overcome it, right? So it's like, okay, I now need to be more flexible. And the reason that I'm not flexible is I don't understand that there's more than one truth. I never look at it thinking that there's more than one right. And until I can learn to do that, right, I'm not going to be flexible, because I'm going to think there's only one right way and it's my way. And that people are going to view me as very inflexible. So it's understanding the root of it, and it could be different for you and different for Chelsea and different for other people. And then what's the skill set that I can acquire that becomes my new thinking habit. So it's essentially kind of rewriting those neural pathways.
Would you say that working with you would be the equivalent of, you know, when you say, okay, I want to get to the source of why, you know, I feel an emptiness or loneliness. I'm going to start therapy. I'm going to go see a therapist. She's going to help me. The therapist can't help you get on a better path in one session. It's not a quick turnaround. I mean, it can be a couple months. It could be a couple of years. I mean, some people are in therapy for the rest of their lives. How would you say, to be successful and to move yourself forward, working with you, what would be your average timeline and like how many sessions? Once a week,
So oftentimes people will come to me and say, I don't know if it's this or therapy, right? So one of the things that I tell people is, if you are having a lot of overwhelm or super stuck and you feel you need help getting through something, therapy is a really good option. If you are looking to have skills or a way of learning new things so that you can get yourself through, this is a good option. From a science standpoint, therapy is working in the conscious, right? So we might change the goals as we're moving along. It's the same with certain kinds of coaching from a science standpoint, but it's going to be like, okay, next week, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try thinking this way, or in the meeting, I'm going to approach somebody a different way. This process, we do all the work in the subconscious. So I'm putting a new skill into your subconscious. We're setting down these neural pathways. And I'm not telling you to think about it short term. I'm not asking you to try it next week. And it can be a matter of weeks, literally just a few weeks, when you start to see the change. And then we'll talk about it in the here and now. So people can be, have a new skill in 3 months. People that are highly resistant that maybe would need 2 to 3 years of therapy to address a specific problem, that might also take us a little longer, but maybe more like 6 months or a year. And again, I'm not pitting one against the other. They both have a purpose. It depends on your objective and where you are, right? Do I need something that's pragmatic? So I get a lot of people that come to me after therapy. They know where the gremlins are, and now they want to have a different skill set going forward when the gremlins show up at work, right? Or as I'm running my business. Does that help?
Yes, totally. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any others?
Interesting. I've never thought of science-based, career path and following goals in such a way as the subconscious. That's so interesting. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, and the other thing is that these things, we set goals around, what you're trying to accomplish in your business or career. But the point of it is whatever we figure out, like whatever the glitch is, or maybe it's just a shift in thinking, it's impacting you everywhere. So a bonus is I often have people come back. I've even gotten calls from spouses saying, oh my God, what did you do to my husband or wife?
Wow.
Because if you're not listening at work, you're not listening at home. If you're really inflexible at work, you're really inflexible at home. So we do it everywhere. And again, we're honing in on things we're trying to achieve in our careers, but it impacts us every place.
Are there any other questions, comments? Just unmute yourself, right, Henry?
We can unmute you. Raise your hand, or if you were to speak into the chat. Well, I'm sure there's still a way. If you have questions after this webinar, I see Susan has, put out a way to contact her. If you're from the webinar, it looks like you can get a 30-minute complimentary brainstorming session. And Susan, is there any more you'd like to say?
No, thanks, guys. I'm sorry I can't see everybody. This is the sad part about these days, right? Hopefully soon we'll be able to do this in person, but I appreciate you spending the end of your day with me, and hopefully you have a terrific evening. And again, thank you, Serendipity ladies, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
A pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
We're going to end on time.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.